And this month, which is Mizrahi Commemoration Month, you are about to hear an unbelievable story from an unbelievable storyteller. But before that, I want to say a few thank yous. The first thank you, and if the audience here doesn't mind, is to the Harissa restaurant, where we have an intimate dinner being served with all types of Middle Eastern foods to celebrate Mizrahi heritage. The owner, Alan, was very gracious in opening his restaurant early for us today, and we're thankful for that. You won't have to watch us eat, you'll just be watching the speaker today. We also want to thank another partner, Jimena, Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, who do amazing work nationwide and also internationally advocating for the 850,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands, and that is a very conservative number, I believe. And they have been wonderful in helping match us with speakers all over the country who are doing small events like this in partnership with Club C today. So with that said, I just want to say a few sentences about the one. We'll do a much better job representing than I ever can. But for those who are not aware, the Jews of Iraq, and Joe Samuels is a Iraqi Jewish refugee, have an unbelievable history going back more than 2 millennia, back to Babylon. And Joe also has written a book that was just published, I believe, last year. To this at the end of the webinar as well. So with that said, I'd like to turn over the camera to Joe, and I also want to thank our partners at Camera, who are doing an amazing job calling out anti-Israel bias wherever they see it, as well as doing amazing work on campus. Thank you, Camera. With that, Joe.
Thank you very much, Odin. Welcome everybody here in the restaurant and in the world of Zoom. The memoir. I want to introduce myself. Of the Middle East and North Africa. Then I will slow down and describe my story in Baghdad, in Iraq, the family, and what the event happened that changed the history of the Jews of Iraq and the Jews in the Arab world. I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, in December of 1930. Next month, Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll be 91. Thank you. Thank you. I was born in Taht al-Takya, that's the part of the Jewish quarter of Baghdad. And my mother tongue is Arabic. And I believed when I grew up that Baghdad was my home and Iraq was my country. The whole world that I grew up in was about 3-4 miles square. We had the school, the synagogue, the butcher, the candy maker, and my playground was the lane, the unpaved lane in the front of our house where we played marble and we played ball with the kids. What? Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah. The history began with the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, 586 BCE, when the king Nebuchadnezzar, who occupied Jerusalem after 2 years of siege, and burnt the temple and brought the young and the energetic and the well learned as slave to Babylonia. 70 years later, the king of Persia, King Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylonia and allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem to build the second temple. The decree was in a stone, round stone. It's found in the British Museum in London. That's where he allowed the Jews to go back. Some went back and built up the second temple, but some stayed. I believe those were my ancestors. And after that, in Babylonia, it was a center of the Jewish religion. Many scholars grew up there. With the exile came a few prophets, Prophet Ezekiel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Jonah, who were buried in Iraq. As a kid, we used to go on Shavuot to visit the grave of Prophet Ezekiel, which is about 80 kilometers from Baghdad. And there, the many books were written, many religious books, including the Talmud Babli, which is the most authoritative book in translation of the Torah in Babylonia. 1,000 years later, in the 7th century, after the death of Prophet Muhammad in 632, Babylonia was occupied by the Muslims. Few thousand Muslims came out from the Arabian Peninsula to spread Islam. They were on horses, camels, with daggers and swords. Within 1 century, they occupied North Africa, they crossed to Spain, occupied the Middle East. They went far to India, Afghanistan, and Indonesia, and all the way to China. And life under the Islam, they allowed the Jews to continue, but they were considered as dhimmi, as a second-class citizens, which they were not allowed to ride a horse in the city or build a house higher than the Muslims, pay extra taxes. Then as we carry further, we advance to the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century, occupied all of this area again, North Africa, Middle East, and of course, they went all the way Eastern Europe, where they went all the way to the gates of Vienna. And that empire lasted for 4.5 centuries. And it was only dismantled after World War I. World War I, the British and the French that won the war one part of the Ottoman Empire. So they drew Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and of the Arabian, how they won the war, and they and emirs and sultan. So they brought to Iraq or at that time, the Arabian Peninsula, and became a king of Iraq. That was in 1920. King Faisal was a wise and very kind person, and he was very much interested in the welfare of all Iraqis. At that time, were about 40% of the city, how important they were. And he was very kind to the Jews. You know, he went to visit their synagogue, and you know, he allowed them to prosper. He also appointed a finance minister, Sir Sasson Haspel. He was the first finance minister who built the economy of Iraq. And in a stroke of genius, Sasson Haspel made a deal that the oil revenue of Iraq will be paid in gold, not in sterling, which proved to be a bonanza for Iraq when this pound sterling collapsed. That he met who became the first president of Israel in 1948, and signed an agreement to allow the Jews to build a home, to start a home in Palestine, provided that the Palestinian would have a home there too, would build a new country, their own country. Community prospered, but it's more important that Iraq was prospered even more. Personally, an era, a hell for the Jews. In the daily newspapers, the anti-Semitic articles began to appear, and Radio Baghdad was making all announcement about how the Jews, they are taking advantage of the Arabs, and a pro-Nazi I was 10 years old at the time. When the British arrived to the outskirts of Baghdad, they did not enter the city. So the coup collapsed and the coup leader fled to Iran. By the way, the coup happened led by a former Prime Minister, Rashid Ali al-Gailani, and masterminded by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, a Jew hater, and he was, when they fled, he had pictures with Hitler. In fact, the Holocaust is attributed to his idea to Hitler. When Hitler wanted to send the Jews to Palestine, he said, don't, he said, kill them. So I don't know how much this influenced Hitler to do to try with the what they did in the Holocaust. So the British didn't enter. So in the meantime, the mobs went into the Jewish quarters, broke homes, killed the men, robbed the houses, raped an undetermined number of women, raped girls, and that lasted for 2 days. On the first day, by the way, we moved from the old city a year earlier. We moved to another area near the Tigris River, a better area with a paved street. So my brother, 6 years old brother, Eliyahu, the first day, he took the bicycle to visit his friend. And instead he came back with traumatic, with crying. He saw on the main street, Al-Rashid Street, how the mob was stopping the minibuses. We didn't have big buses, we had minibuses, taking the Jewish passengers, robbed them, and stabbed them to death. So he ran back home, and we immediately reinforced our door. We put furniture behind the door, just in case of the mob comes in to break it. And I, as a 10 years old, I carried buckets of water to the roof to be boiled and put oil in it in case of the mob comes in, that we can toss on them, give us a chance that we can climb one wall to another. So as a boy, the culture there, the boys are taught not to cry. Crying is only for the girls. So, but I cried myself every night to sleep. Okay?
Yes, yes, keep going.
Yeah. At the same time, we heard stories about Muslim men standing in front of the Jewish homes with guns and daggers to protect them from the mobs. Some even took Jewish families to their homes to shelter them. Those were really the righteous among the nations. Those were our heroes. So they restored orders. So we had nowhere to hide and nowhere to run to. We had to continue hoping that things will change. There was no Israel then. There was no country to take us. Only my brother, who the story about the bicycle, and he left to study and never came. I felt fear, and I made my idea of thinking that Iraq was my country and Baghdad was my home was totally shattered when I heard about this was called the Farhud official government number. It says 179 Jews were killed and some 400 injured. But the record of the community was at least 400 were killed and 1,000 injured. In fact, there was even some of the injured, they took them to the hospital. About 100 of them were poisoned to death. And of course, all night we heard women screaming and then silence. We heard shotguns also. So after the mob was dispersed and life went back to normal, I decided personally, I said, this is working on the partition of Palestine, mobs, demonstration right through Baghdad, denouncing that any partition of Palestine will be accepted. Our school, I was in high school, 17 years old. Disloyal, but we are just like all Iraqis. Of course, after that, the war broke. Iraq and other 4 countries attacked Israel in 1948, on May 15th, 1948. And when they planned and torture, accusing Zionism, Jews, how can they loyal to the pro-Nazi? When the British arrived, we felt a sense. So after the war, there would eliminate Israel. The Iraqi government turned against the Jewish population. It was terrible with the arrest and torture. We knew what it meant to torture because they will make you sign anything when they accuse you. Yeah. So I graduated from high school in 48, and I applied and I got visa and passport to leave Iraq to study in America. I was accepted in 3 universities, and I was planning to be a nuclear physicist. But the Iraqi government refused to let me go. I don't know if any of you knows what exit visa means. You know, we have visa to enter a country, but we have to have an exit visa to leave Iraq. They wanted a guarantee that I should be back after study of 3,000 pounds. So just to show you the value of the pound, a family of 4 people, they used. So how 3,000 pounds is it's big amount of money. Yeah. So I did to smuggle out of Iraq. And my older brother arranged that we can go, we'll travel from Baghdad to Basra. Basra is the southern port of the city in Iraq. And we arrived to Basra. And the secret police was waiting for us at the station. So they called us. They said, what's your name? So I said, my name is Yusuf. And Yusuf is not a Jewish name, not both Jewish and Arabic name. And what is your brother's name? So I said, his name is Nuri. Again, it didn't show that we are Jewish. So he said, what's your father's name? So I said, Sasson. Ah, he said, you're Jewish. What are you doing in Basra? Are you smuggling to Israel? So I said, no, sir, we're not. I'm visiting my aunt who lived in Basra. And her cousin, he said, what's his name? So I said, his name was Aghababa. Suddenly, a big smile erupted on his face. He said, I know him. He has a store selling men's clothes, and I get my clothes from him. So I knew that it's a miracle from Hashem, that this guy, what happened. So he let us go, and then after 2 days, we got with the smugglers, and smugglers in the middle of the night. There's a small boat about 30 feet long, and it has no motors. It worked by punting and rowing. And the smuggler made a wooden false room in the boat and cover it with hay. And 12 of us, boys and girl teenagers, we hid in that space. And that boat was supposed to go to south, and after maybe 3-4 hours, it hit Iran one side and Iraq on the other side. So it worked with the tide. As the tide goes, they row it and you go there. But to our bad luck, we faced a strong wind. So they couldn't move. the smugglers couldn't move, and we went on a small tributary river where they have the appointed as a leader to take care of the group. And I asked the smuggler to get some food. We don't have where to go to the toilet, need to drink. So they went to the river. Everybody was drinking from the polluted river, the tributary water. And we have to wait to the same time, 24 hours later, that the tide cycle goes south instead of the north. So the next night, the tide was with us, and the smuggler were able to take us across. We crossed to Iran, and they all come out. They tensed, crying, and some were smiling to be in Iran. I must say the Jewish community in Iran took us to their home. They fed us. We slept in their home, and then we went from what's the city called Khorramshahr on the river to another city called Ahwaz, which I went there too. And I stayed 2 months there to help others who were smuggling to Iran. And after that, from Ahwaz, I went to Tehran, the capital, and Israel sent planes. At that time, I think Alaska Airline, disguised under Middle East Airways, they came, they picked us in Tehran and took us to Israel. And we couldn't fly over Syria, so fly north to Turkey. And from Turkey, we went all the way to the Mediterranean, and we arrived to Tel Aviv. It was a long trip, about 4 to 5 hours. We had no food. There was no seat belt. The plane was a cargo plane that was converted. We had benches, wooden benches, and we sat, but we finally made it to Israel. There, when I got out, I kissed the ground, and the first time in my life that I felt free. It was the happiest day of my life. It was March 2nd. It was the first day of Purim. And they took us from there, from the airport to it's called Sha'ar Aliyah, and all the British camp to check us for health. And they sprayed us with DDT to kill any germ that we're coming with. And after 3-4 days, we went to a ma'bara, the refugee camps. And we had the steel beds and the straw mattresses, and I stood in line for the meals. They gave us food that I've never tasted in my life. The slimy fish, what was the herring. They gave us salami. I've never tasted salami in my life. Margarine, black bread. The tea was light, but I was grateful and I was happy to have a meal. They gave us the food. I stayed there about a couple of weeks in the refugee camp, the Ma'bara next to Netanya. Then from there, they came to tell us, where can we go? So one guy said, you come to a kibbutz, they give you food, they give you everything. You don't have to worry. They give you work. So I said, yeah, I go. So they took me to a kibbutz, and the next day made me a shepherd. They said, and I was walking in with the sheep, and I felt like my mind stopped thinking. Then they put me next time on to pick up grapes. I didn't like it. Then after that, they put me in what they call the refet, the barn where they have the cows to clean. It was smelling terrible. Then finally put me in the Chadar Ochel. So I said, I don't want to be in the kibbutz. My mind was just stopped. So I went from one place to other with a menial job, I took a course in cutting stone to build the walls. Then I went to a place where the land with stone, to pick up the stone to make the land more cultivable. And after a while, I joined the Israeli Defense Force, and I was appointed to the Navy. And I was lucky, I was in Haifa. And but when I arrived and during that period, I felt angry, disappointed, because when I was born and grew up, it was in a poor area. But later on, my older brother was 20 years, who never went to school, but I call him that he has a PhD in common sense. Knew who to bribe to get licenses, import. So we became wealthy. A nouveau riche, suddenly we had money. So I was really spoiled. And you know the old saying, a spoiled child is a miserable adult. I was miserable and make everybody around me miserable. Yeah. Then I realized how lucky I am to be in Israel, and Israeli Navy helped me to change. After 6 years, I went to Montreal, hoping to go to study. I couldn't make it, and finally I got married and have 3 kids. And in '78, I came to the United States we live in Santa Monica for the last 43 years. In summary, I learned from my experience in life that all what happened beyond our control, we cannot control. But what we can do with it is what makes us. So, I learned to take the difficulties as a stepping stone to come up. The failures in my life, I learned from it that I can grow up with it. And I thank God that myself and my family are here. And I lived, fulfilled my dream. I've lived better than ever I dreamt in my life to be in the United States of America. And I'm grateful. So I'm open to any questions if you have to ask. Thank you so much.
Joe, I'm going to scoot in next to you while we do a little
Sure.
Q&A session here. And everybody, please, try to prepare a question or two. We'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A here. Joe, thank you again so much for joining us. I've had the privilege of hearing your story and reading your book. And I think one thing that I think is amazing about your story that you didn't have time to go into is how there were actually multiple times where you applied and were prepared to go to school for some kind of engineering program. And whether you had kids or didn't have money or there was the exit visa, you were continually stopped getting to pursue a higher education. And you got a real estate license and you were an entrepreneur, but you could never quite get to school, which you have a love of learning. But that's what I love hearing, if you could just share
Sure.
about your children and what happened with your children in education.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that I dreamed to be a nuclear physicist. So when I was refused, I was very disappointed. Then I went to Israel, and there's no chance at the time in 1950 to allow a young man like me, 20 years old, to go to university. They want bodies to defend in the IDF. So I couldn't go to college. So after that, I said, I go to Canada. So I applied and get accepted. But then I had no money. I had the cold weather, the English and French there. So I decided, I'm going to leave my education to my kids. So at that time, I had to choose what to do. So I had no talent, no higher education, no special skill. So what kind of a job? I said, the only thing I can make it is going to selling. So I said, I'm going to go in real estate, selling real estate. So it was struggle, 6 months, 8 months. I lived on a $50 a week, the owner advanced, but then I made it. In Montreal.
And then your kids.
And then I decided to have my kids to learn. So I have 3 kids now. They have two PhD and 1 MD.
Wow.
And not only that, but they all learn the technique of to be financially independent. And I have my first granddaughter. She just finished PhD program in psychology at the University of Virginia, and she's back in Montreal. She's working at Kaiser.
Wow.
Did you meet your wife in Montreal?
Yeah. No, my wife, actually, my wife was born in India from Iraqi family,
So she's also Mizrahi.
Mizrahi. And she, after 1948, India was created separate, they divided India to India and Pakistan. So she left to go to England. Her brother was in Canada. She came in, and I met her 3 days after she arrived from London in a wedding. So she sat next to me. I asked her if I could take her home, if I could see her tomorrow. And 2 years after, we got married. The rest is history.
Beautiful history. I think it's important to note, Joe shared his story. Every Jewish family sitting at the table here and anybody watching this broadcast who hopefully got through all the technical difficulties, everyone's family has a story like this. And what's important, and I think it's something that many of us have seen when we go to the Holocaust Museum in Israel, is they say the Holocaust was in 6 million. It was 1 + 1 + 1. And that's why it's so important, regardless of wherever your family story is, whether it's a story from Russia or an American Jewish story or a Mizrahi Sephardic story. It's important that we all know each other's stories, because in the end, it's all our story. We're all part of the same big, beautiful story. There's a lot of tragedy, but, and this is something that Joe wouldn't say about himself, because maybe it's an intellectual way to frame your story, but you never consider yourself a victim. You always talk about yourself as a refugee that had to overcome. And I think there is so much power in that, because people will be hit with tragedy, whether it's a Jewish story, whether it's just somebody anywhere living in any country. Bad things can befall anyone. And if you define yourself by that, then what you do is pass grievances onto your children. And I love that you point out that your children have financial independence.
Precisely.
And this idea that whatever happens, you figure out how you are going to work within the society you're in, contribute to a better society, and give your children a better future. And I know you didn't start telling your story till in maybe the last decade or less. And you didn't want to burden your family with your story, which I would never see it as a burden. I mean, for us, you're enlightening us, and we're so thankful for it.
Yeah, up to 2017, I never discussed it with my family. I kept it in my heart, all the story, the pain. In 2007, I'm sorry, not 17. I was 77 years old. I joined memoir classes, writing memoir, and I spoke about my escape. The first time how I escaped, and I was crying the whole way, and I sense a bittersweet tears, those that are of joy that I got out, and those of the fear that I lived there, So I always say, I and everybody everywhere, nobody could choose our parents. Nobody could choose our genes, and nobody could choose the environment we grow up in. The only thing is in our power is to how to work with the things that we have, and to take these difficulties and build up the future. And the secret of the Jews is we remember the past, but we refuse to live in the past. Living in the past is a curse, because you'll feel all the pain and become a victim, and life of a victimhood is a terrible way to live. But if I'm of optimism that you're going to try to make it, it's only part of life, the difficulties. And I'm proud that my kids are doing well, my grandkids are doing well. And I hope everybody learn that to remember the past, but never live in the past.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to cut this up. Thank you. Fortunately, we get to keep eating and speaking with Joe, but we will have contact information online. Joe also blogs, and he's very hip and current.
JoeSamuels.net.
JoeSamuels.net, and he'll be happy to speak with you more. Thank you again to our partners, Camera and Jimena, and to the restaurant Harissa. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.